In this fifth session of week 4, we will talk about famous Korean food, instant ramen. Of course, South Korea is not the only country that produces instant ramen noodle, but somehow today, South Korean instant ramen noodles such as Shinramen is very popular globally. And industrialization always requires fast food. If we look at the human culinary culture and culinary changes, after the Industrial Revolution, many new food appeared, and they are normally fast food. You see that everywhere. And in Asia, part of that was instant ramen noodle, of course, invented in Japan. The first instant ramen noodle appeared in Japanese market in 1958. And the person who invented this noodle was not Japanese. Actually, he was a Taiwanese, Mr. Ando Momofuku. And because Taiwan was a part of the Japanese Empire, he lived in Japan even after the war. And afterward, the post-war Japanese society was chaotic and extremely poor, just like in Korea and elsewhere. And so he thought that the poor working class Japanese, one day he was passing and he saw a group of people were eating ramen, the traditional Japanese ramen, and enjoying it so much. So coming home, he thought, is there any way for me to massively produce ramen so that anyone can eat this noodle? And actually, he succeeded by applying traditional Taiwanese noodle making method. The Taiwanese noodle was made when you make a flour and dough, you mix salt and other taste and flavors already to the dough. And then you make noodle and you boil it and it becomes tasty noodle. So with you applying that technology, he created his company Nissin. Nissin is a very big company today, and the Nissin originated in Osaka, and there he began to sell instant ramen noodle since the late 1950s. And of course, it was great because it was very cheap, quick, and convenient for working class Japanese. Now, in Korea, a man who created the Samyang ramen business later, he heard about instant ramen noodle in Japan, so he went to Japan and he tried to learn the technology of making instant ramen noodle, which was so popular by then in Japan in 1963. Nevertheless, Nissin did not give him any help. There was another company, now Myojo food company, and now they were using different technology from Nissin. And Myojo made ramen. You see this Myojo ramen on the top right. And Myojo ramen was like today's ramen. So the noodle was a purely flour noodle. But then he would add soup-based powdered soup to ramen noodle. So when you cook your ramen noodle, you open it, the package, and then you boil the noodle, and then you add the powdered soup base. So that became the Myojo technology. And the Samyang, the guy, Mr. Kim, he was able to learn this technology from Myojo. This was a beautiful story, by the way. And initially, he contacted both Nissin and later Myojo. And they were reluctant in giving him all the technology they had. But later, the Myojo company owner called him and he said, I will give you this technology and bring it to South Korea. And out of goodwill. So he returned and he started to produce Samyang ramen. By the way, if we look at the invention of instant ramen noodle in Japan and also in Korea, it is related to post-World War transnational connections. Like Ando Momofuku, who invented ramen noodle, he was a Taiwanese who was living in Japan because Taiwan was colony of Japanese Empire. And then, if there was not much wheat flour in Asia, in Japan, which used to be, it wouldn't have been possible. But now Americans came and they supplied very cheap wheat flour mills. Thanks to this abundant supply of cheap wheat flour, they were able to invent this. And the same for South Korean ramen noodle. Because of the former colonial connection between Koreans and Japanese, he was able to learn the new technology and started to produce ramen noodle in South Korea. Let's go back to Mr. Ando Momofuku's time a little bit. And this is, on right, you see the big building in Osaka. Now that is the old headquarters of the Nissin. And they produced, their ramen noodle was very much based on traditional Japanese ramen soup. So the first ramen, the most popular one, was chicken based. So that's why the first Nissin ramen noodle was chicken soup based. And so did Samyang ramen in Korea when Samyang company started to sell their ramen. It was chicken soup based. However, in Korean culinary tradition, people revere beef over any meat, over pork, over chicken, over dog meat as well. So when there was a need to shift from soup-based ramen to beef soup-based ramen, and that's what happened in ramen market later when the Samyang ramen continued to produce chicken soup-based ramen, and until the new competitor rose from Lotte, which is another big food company, and they started to produce beef soup-based ramen noodle. And the market responded quickly from chicken soup-based ramen to beef soup-based ramen. So that's why now the dominance of Samyang became less, and then Nongshim ramen started to rise, and eventually Nongshim won in the huge competition, and Nongshim today is the biggest instant ramen company in South Korea. And as I said, Nongshim's point was making beef-based, but later they also invented new ramen, the Shin ramen, with a lot of hot chili taste. And that became a big hit in 1986 when Nongshim's Shin ramen came out to the market. People fell in love with it, and all the other ramen companies also started to make their ramen noodle hot. And today, as a matter of fact, if you go to South Korean supermarket, most of ramens are very hot. And I remember it very well because I lived in South Korea until my 20s, and now that was already 30-something years ago. And I remember that whenever I visited South Korea afterward, the taste of ramen became hotter and hotter, and now it is very hot. like a bulldog ramen, for example. Anyway, this hot taste is very unique, and it was enjoyed by so many people. And because hot taste tend to relieve stress, and we see that as a mega trend. Whenever there is a social economic crisis, hot taste food tend to be sold more. So definitely there is some connection between stress and hot food. And South Korea is a very stressed society, and hot food gained great popularity. Ramen noodle became a daily food, and South Koreans today, they are the biggest consumers of instant ramen noodle, more than Japan, more than any other country in general. And South Korea produces a lot of ramen, instant ramen noodle, variety of different kinds, and it is a dominant exporter to many markets, particularly in the US. The South Korean ramen noodle is gaining huge popularity. And as they succeeded in making ramen noodle, they also, the Nongshim started to make instant jjajangmyeon. Jjajangmyeon was very popular food, and now it became an instant jjajangmyeon, which also hit the market very well, and that helped Nongshim Ramyeon to grow much bigger than any other food company, similar companies in South Korea. And in our last session, the sixth session, we will talk about eating out. As people's living standard improves with industrialization, started since 1960s. Now people have more money, and more money means they have more opportunity to go out and eat. So South Korean eating out industry began to develop. So let me talk about that in our next session.